Alright, what's up everybody? Welcome back to the Alpha Obeisance channel. Today is going to be an interesting, exciting video, at least for me. I'm really excited to bring this video to you. I don't know how I'm going to go about it. As I've mentioned before, I don't script my videos. I just do it purely by the seat of my pants. It's just how I roll. But as you can tell, if you have seen any of my videos in the past, something drastic has changed here. And for new users, I'm going to give you a quick crash course here. I have been using Arch Linux for the past 3 years. I have been studying Linux for the past 5 years, but the past 3 has been exclusively Arch Linux, because once I learned how to configure and optimize Arch Linux, it was literally the most stable system I've ever had in PC computing. It's literally been that good. It's my host PC was hosting Arch Linux for the past 3 years. My wife's computer, my son's computer, my daughter's computer, and 3 Steam Decks all hosting Arch Linux. A vanilla Arch Linux customized for our needs. And it's been fantastic. I truly had become a fanboy of Arch Linux. And not just Arch Linux, but vanilla-based distros. So you got Arch Linux, Fedora, and Debian. Those 3 distributions are the shot callers of Linux in my world. But that's all starting to change, and I am beginning to accept a new member of this sort of vanilla-based, keep it simple, stupid process. You know, this little gaggle of distributions that rule them all, so to speak. So as you can tell, I have installed nixos onto my system, and I just found out about nixos. Like literally 2 days ago, a comment was left on one of my rant videos regarding hoodwinking new users into, you know, buying into all the bullshit. No, what's the best distribution for Linux beginners and blah blah blah. They left this comment on that video saying the new users should start with nixos, and I was like, okay, I don't know what that is, but I'll look into it. And I did. I started Googling, I started watching videos, and immediately the first thing that popped out to me was this master configuration file to control the entire system. Literally just one file to completely configure your system. And I was mind blown because I've been working on that myself with Arch Linux for the past 3 years. I had a master script that called on a bunch of other scripts that effectively, upon a fresh bare bones Arch Linux installation, I could run these scripts and then reboot, and it would literally be my personal build configuration. It was the same thing, only mine was way more complicated because I'm not a programmer. I'm not a programmer, and I was fumbling my way through it, but I managed to do it. So when I saw that this nixos, man, what is this nixos, uses a singular configuration file for the entire system, I had to look into it. So the first thing I did was dumped it into VMware and booted up a nixos VM, got the installation done, got to looking at the configuration file, and was like, wow, okay, this is actually really, really impressive. What do I got to do to configure this master configuration file to work with my AMD CPU and my Nvidia GPU? Now, just a little disclaimer here, you know, I've heard people complain about Nvidia for pretty much the entire time that I've ever used Linux. And the reason that is because Nvidia was hesitant to provide any kind of Linux support for the longest time. And even now, their proprietary drivers, they don't really go open source, and so the open source drivers just suck. And it's been a big controversy regarding Nvidia, but the truth of it is that Nvidia has been nothing but good to me. I paid an assload of money for Nvidia GPUs, so I have no hesitation using proprietary drivers, and since they are available on Linux now, they just work. They just work for me. Literally, once you configure your system for use with Nvidia GPUs, they just work. You just have to know how to properly configure your system, and we're going to address that here in a while. So this was cool. I got this VM, I was looking through the configuration file, and everything was incredibly appealing. I kind of come up with this like mock configuration for Nix that theoretically would work for my system. And I took the leap. I installed NixOS onto my system. Everything was great. I went through the GUI-based installer, which was fine and dandy. You know, click, 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 and we're good to go. Kind of snagged around 40, I think it was like 45, 46%. It seemed to hang there forever, and then all of a sudden it was done. So I rebooted the system, pulled out my USB drive, and booted into a CLI instead of my KDE Plasma desktop environment that I tend to choose. I'm like, okay, well, this is interesting. So I logged in via the CLI, and I'm staring at this black screen of nothingness, and I navigate to the configuration file, and I start looking for potential problems. I couldn't figure it out myself because I wasn't familiar with the syntax or the structure of this configuration file, so I pulled out my laptop with Windows on it and got to Googling. So I ended up Googling and getting things kind of squared away, a couple times booting back into the live environment and trying a few different things. And that's when I really started to realize that, wait a minute, like NixOS, like you can literally, even if it's broken, you can just go into your configuration file and update it and then literally just rebuild the system, and then boom, you're literally using a brand new system. And you don't, not always, but most of the time, you don't even have to like reboot your system. You just modify this master configuration file, rebuild, and boom, everything's reloaded upon completion of the rebuild. And it takes a matter of like 10, 15, 20 seconds to rebuild your system. So then I really started getting into it and started kind of powerhousing through, experimenting with a few different things. And that's when I finally configured this. This here is my kind of a mock-up version of my configuration, barring any personal data. And I'm going to kind of give you a rundown. Don't mind this here. It's just kind of my really, it's literally a mess. Like I've moved it around so much that I've got shit that I cut out of here for using it. I was missing commands because I instead of copying them, I cut them out and stuff like that. This is a big mess, but it kind of gives you a rundown of how to use the configuration, because that's how my brain works. I more or less brought the basic syntax commands into my configuration as notes. Granted, they were noted out beforehand, but I digress. This is just kind of my cheat sheet, built-in cheat sheet into my configuration, and this is what I used to learn how to configure. But this here is the basis of my configuration, and I'd like to give you a rundown. It's not going to help, users that don't have similar configurations, but if you have an AMD CPU and an Nvidia GPU, especially within the past like 2 or 3 generations, theoretically, this build should work for you. Now, while I very, very, very rarely ever use GitHub because I'm not a programmer, I will possibly upload my configuration to my GitHub and provide that in the link below, so that if you want to tinker with it and see if it'll work on yours. That is the beauty of NixOS, is that theoretically, you should be able, provided you have a very similar build to mine, you should be able to just copy my configuration, edit the programs and software that you do or do not want to use, and then boom, you're good to go. So we're going to go down this configuration. I'm going to tell you, before we get started, I'm going to tell you exactly what this system will do right now. It is completely configured to do everything that I did on Arch Linux. That's the beauty of it. I've got full Nvidia X11 support because I don't really care for Wayland. I haven't figured Wayland out with Nvidia yet. So I stick to X11 because it's tried and true. So you've got full AMD CPU support. You've got the Nvidia GPU support with proprietary drivers, so it literally just works. I've got Vulkan libraries enabled so that you've got access to RTX, or also known as ray tracing, so that you can truly capitalize on your RTX abilities, things like DLSS and so forth. And the list goes on. So this is literally a fully configured gaming NixOS distribution, which is exactly what my machine is meant to do. It's my leisure machine, therefore it's for gaming. And let's just get into it, and I'll kind of break it down for you. We got hardware, or importing hardware-specific configurations. This is imports your hardware-configuration.nix, which is located in the etc/nixos directory. There's just 2 configurations in there: your base configuration here, and then your hardware configuration. And if I remember reading right, you don't actually modify your hardware configuration at all. Everything is done here. Therefore, you import hardware configuration. I've got unfree packages enabled. So this is proprietary software, just enabling it so that you can actually use Nvidia proprietary drivers that you actually paid for, you know, the ones that actually work. I've got the setting the NixOS version, so I'm using 23.11, enabling systemd instead of grub. I've got kernel packages enabled, so I've got like my Nvidia packages, or my Nvidia modules. I've got my Wacom modules so that my Wacom 22-inch Cintiq tablet is functioning. That was actually the process that actually really helped me understand how to enable the modules properly. I was trying to get my Wacom tablet working. So now that's all good to go. This loads at boot, so my kernel modules, and then I've got my available kernel modules. So I've got like my USB storage, NVMe, SD mods, SR mods, so on and so forth. So this loads in with the initial RAM disk. We've got additional kernel parameters, is setting my mod sets for NVIDIA. I've got file system support, so ext4, VFAT, NTFS, all the standard crap. We've got reducing swappiness to prioritize physical memory over swap. So I have got this set up because I have the operating system functions on a Western Digital 4 terabyte M.2 SSD. And so by reducing swappiness and prioritizing physical memory over swap, that just saves your disk usage and so forth. It makes it a lot easier on your M.2. So then I've got the AMD microcode for security. I've got a specific NVIDIA driver. I'm using the stable driver, as you can see here. I'm not really one to be like, oh, I've got to have the latest, greatest, you know, bleeding edge, because I prefer stability over features and function. Like, if it's that cool, well, guess what? It's going to make it into stable version eventually anyway, so a little patience never hurt anybody. I'd rather have a stable system. So LTS for the win. I've got enabled Bluetooth support as well as 32-bit DRI support for OpenGL. I've also got Pipewire, ALSA support, Pulse Audio support in Pipewire, as well as jack support in Pipewire. I have configured this so that rather than listing every single service individually, we've just got a function to define Pipewire services, and then we just enable them here. I did the same thing with the services on Xserver, enabling Xserver, my video drivers, my display manager for SDDM, as well as Plasma 5, and of course Wacom. So that's all enabled in the same way through a function with Xserver. I've got my security functions, fail2ban and virtualization, as well as the firewall, and then I've got my environment system packages. This is where you install or determine what packages are installed via your configuration. So if you let's say, for example, you have a list of packages, a list of softwares that you know without a doubt that you want to be installed every single time you reinstall your system. Every single time that you rebuild your system, you want these packages. This is where you define it. Mine's a little messed up here, bear with me. OCD gets the best of me. So this is where you define these packages. Every time you do a rebuild, these packages are installed. It just ensures that this is just hard coding these programs into your system's configuration. That's all it's doing. So defining system-wide packages to install. There is a process of installing softwares. Like if you discover a new software and you want to try it out on your operating system without actually committing it to your build, you can actually do that through Nix, through an installation command. And I'll go over that a little bit later, possibly in a more in-depth tutorial video that I will release at a later date. But for the sake of summarizing everything, you've got a temporary installation where you can install the software, you can run it, you can use it just like it's literally installed on your system. It's just temporary. And it's fantastic. It allows you to test drive softwares that you may be considering adding to your indefinite build. And that is really, really appealing to me, because you can run these test builds, and if you don't like it, all you got to do is rebuild. And when you run your rebuild command, it just rebuilds everything to your baked-in configuration. And that is incredibly appealing. In terms of development, that is just mind-blowingly powerful. And I absolutely love it. So then we've got the traditional stuff like setting your host name and enabling network manager, time zone, and locale. Enabling sudo, I've confined it to the wheels group so that, only the wheel group can run sudo. as well as setting up the user configuration. I did notice that, attempting to make this tutorial, that I had set it up initially to set ZSH as the default shell for just the user. This is how I originally had it configured, and then later I realized I could configure it to be system-wide, so I've got two different configurations for ZSH here. This one is essentially null and void. I could actually comment this out and be just fine because we've got it enabled at a system level. And then we've got enabling fonts. You can add all your fonts in here that you want, and then boom, they're all installed. Last but not least, I've got storage device configuration. Mine is a lot more in depth because I've got a whole bunch of hard drives. But this part was interesting because I couldn't really figure out how to do it. Basically, you put in file systems dot with your directory. I usually put mine in, like, I don't know, mount or run, either one. And then I've got, you equals your device equals UUID. You put your UUID in here with your file system type and ext4, and then boom, you rinse and repeat for all of your drives. And then upon reboot, all of your drives will be mounted exactly where you want them to be. And that's it. That is it. This tiny, tiny little configuration file right here literally is a fully functional, pre-built, purpose-built for gaming with AMD CPU and Nvidia GPUs. Full Vulkan support for ray tracing and all of that good fancy shit that we as gamers like. This one configuration does everything that I was doing on Arch. And the beauty of it is that all of the packages installed are kind of there. I don't quite know how to explain it because I'm not too familiar with NixOS yet, but every single package that you install on NixOS is basically installed in its own confined little happy place. Therefore, there is no risk of dependency hell. And that is something that, admittedly, when I was learning to use Arch Linux, I ran into all the time, was dependency hell. And I mentioned in one of my rant videos about how dependable Arch Linux had been for me. And it had been, but I mentioned that there were a couple occasions throughout the year that, whether the internet cut out or whatever, I got a corrupted package, I'd have a little bit of an issue. I'd have to track down the package, or maybe it was an outdated package that was required by another package, and you end up in dependency hell. That does happen, but I learned how to use the system, so it's not that it was difficult to resolve, it was just more of a nuisance than anything. And that's what sold me on NixOS, is that I no longer have to deal with that because everything is compartmentalized. Every single package is compartmentalized into its own little happy place. And so I do have a little bit of learning to do. I got to learn how to configure things. Like it took me a minute because, I installed Tilix, my favorite terminal to use, and it was all fine and great. It functioned the way that I wanted it to, but I could not modify any of its appearances, any of its custom GUI based stuff. I could not configure it for nothing, and I had to do a little bit of research. But I'm telling you guys, you're going to see some interesting videos in the future regarding NixOS, because as of right now, it has run away with my heart, man. Jolene. Yeah, I can't sing, but you get my point. Like, Jolene done gone and stole my heart with this one, and Arch Linux might be pissed. Like, I stand by Arch Linux, man. It is a fantastic distribution. I will still be using Arch Linux in so many cases, but I'm going to continue to test drive NixOS for the next couple weeks to see how it fares. I've already done a little bit of gaming, and it's been fantastic. It's been indistinguishable from my experience on Linux, and I'm telling you now that if it continues to prove to be this stable with just a single configuration file, I will probably commit to using NixOS as my primary distribution as a gamer. Not only as a gamer, but a content creator. I've got all kinds of projects out there. Like, this system makes my life so much easier because I no longer have to worry about configuring my system. I just do it once and I'm done with it. If I add something to my system that I feel warrants baking it into my configuration, all I got to do is add it once and I'm done. All you got to do at that point is make sure that you back up your your configuration. Back it up to a safe place that you can access it once if you do happen to do a reinstall for whatever reason. Then all you got to do is toss that configuration in. So keep it on a backup drive or a thumb drive or something, hide it somewhere in the cloud, and then just call upon that configuration when you do your reinstall, hit rebuild, and boom, there's your system. In a matter of seconds, there is your system. So that's all I've got to say for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's going to be an exciting future ahead. And yeah, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, definitely drop them in the comment section below. If you like the video, consider hitting that like button. It does let me know that I'm doing something right. If you really like the video, consider hitting that subscribe button. I'm going to do my best to start bringing videos on a regular basis. I don't really have a schedule, but I do drop them either sometimes in batches, 2 or 3 videos at a time, or at least once a week is my goal. So that being said, I appreciate you stopping by. We'll catch you in the next one.